Well, hello, and welcome back. I'm AJ O'Neill. This is Beyond Code Live, and we're going to go over how you can get type linting in your project without using TypeScript. So you can take the benefit of tsserver and tscheck without actually having to write in TypeScript, and you can use a little JSDoc to get a little more out of it. There's kind of 5 things we're going to go over here. First of all, I'm going to show you a demo. Then I'm going to tell you what very simple prereqs that you need to kind of just have installed on your computer. And then we'll go over the per project configuration that you would need to be able to use this, how you'd apply it to an existing project, and then finally, I'm just going to walk through the example project here is half-baked in that it has purposeful errors. So I'm just going to walk through those errors and then solving them so that you can kind of see some of the most common things that you would do. And the link to the project is in the doobly-doo. So I've got everything set up. It's just a fresh clone of this repo. And then I've got the things that need to be installed on my computer, already installed on my computer. So I'm just going to go up to the top here. These are the kind of benefits you get. So for example, you get some evaluation that you wouldn't get with something like JSHint. So it's checking more than syntax. It's actually kind of deep checking between files. Do the files exist? Do the types in the other files exist? So here, the first error we're getting is, hey, I'm trying to require something that doesn't exist. That's just kind of nice to know, hey, I've got a typo in my require, right? Then you get similar things. So the tsserver has everything that's in the language of JavaScript is already described and built in. Here, for example, I've got a string and I'm calling .match on the string and I've got a regular expression and I'm trying to index into it and it's saying, hey, well, you know what? If you call match, one of the possible outcomes is that you get an array or you get null. So it has the type information about all of the Node stuff, all of the plain JavaScript stuff baked in. And then if you have type information, so for example, here my user object is supposed to have given name, and then I goofed up and I said, oh, it's first name, and it's going to complain about that. Now that's actually because I have some JSDoc suggesting what it should be, and we'll see that later on. But I'm just running through this really quickly so you can kind of see here we have 2 items in an array. They're supposed to be of type user, and it's saying, hey, one of these is not a complete user type. Also here, I'm just going to go ahead and uncomment that. So we can have custom objects on, say, Express that it'll recognize, and then other objects that it doesn't recognize. Again, same thing. We can extend existing types. So this is just an example of, we often put stuff on Express that wasn't there before. You can do all that. And then let's see, is there anything else? Here's an example again with Express, but I mistype a function or this function, this route doesn't actually exist. And it's saying, hey, that's going to be undefined. And this thing takes a function, so it shouldn't go there. So it's like JSHint++, because it's evaluating between files as well as a little bit deeper inspection of what's going on in the JavaScript. So that's why we'd want this type linting, because it just gives us more help than what you'd get with JSHint or ESLint or some of those other things. So that out of the way, let's move on to number 2 here. What are the requirements that you need to have? Well, obviously you got to have Node. You're going to need to install TypeScript. You don't have to write TypeScript, but the TypeScript package comes with tsserver and TSC, which stands for TypeScript server and TypeScript check. So you're going to need those things there. And then if you're using VS Code, it's baked in. The plugin for TypeScript is already baked into VS Code. If you're using Vim, for example, the Vim AL, then you just need to let it know that's baked in as well, except here's the thing. It won't know to look at the tsconfig file, we'll talk about that in just a second, to know that it should lint JavaScript files as TypeScript. It's going to think, hey, I'm going to lint TypeScript files as TypeScript, but I'm not going to lint JavaScript files as TypeScript. And so basically you just need to give it a little bit of configuration. This is it right there. So if you're using Vim and AL, you just need to say, hey, for JavaScript, I want you to use tsserver. And if you're using JSHint or ESLint or whatever, and you want to continue using that, you'd put that in the array as well. So that's that. It's really simple. You got Node, you got TypeScript, and then you potentially, if you're using Vim, just need to make basically a 1-line change to say, hey, use the TypeScript server or linting. And then alternatively, I'll let you read about this in the .vimrc that's in the project file, but it turns out you can have per project .vimrc configurations. So if you didn't want to change this for all of your projects, this actually can be a per project configuration as well. So with that said, let's get to what the per project configuration looks like. First, let's just kind of break down a normal project. So normal project, you might have something like server.js, you might have a lib file, you're going to have Node modules. If you're going to be doing type linting, you're also going to install some types, and what types you install is kind of going to depend on your project and what you're doing, but you can imagine that you're going to want the node types installed, probably the express types installed. If you're using a database library, there's probably types that exist for that. So you kind of just got to do a little bit of research to see as you go. So that's all the normal, like pretty much normal stuff right here. But then you've got your tsconfig.json, which we only need a couple of things different from what the default is. You're going to need possibly a typings folder. We're going to put some overrides to types, like what I talked about earlier with Express, where Express doesn't have a rec.user, but we want to use a rec.user, stuff like that. And then you're going to have a types.js for your JSDoc. And this is where you can share types between files in your project, as well as just putting JSDoc in your project. And we'll see all that in just a minute. So just breaking that down, it's your source code, it's your local types, it's your definitely typed type definitions, which are from the @types organization on NPM, if the project doesn't include type files in itself, because you can get type files one of three ways. The project can be in TypeScript, it can have .dts files like what you see right here installed alongside in the NPM package, or you can get the community source types. Don't worry too much about that. We'll go over that in a second. And then type overrides, which is something that you definitely would need to use for Express, or I shouldn't say definitely, but highly, highly likely would need to use for Express. So the configuration that you need to do, those are all the files. There's a couple of key pieces that you need. One, the tsconfig.json must have an include directive, and it needs to specify those files that you want it to have. So it needs to know all of your JavaScript files. It needs to know that it is inspecting JavaScript files. If you have everything at the top level, you could just use */star.js. But if you kind of separate things out a little bit and have some examples folders and some test folders, et cetera, and you don't want it to do everything, you just want to make sure that this does not have any typos in it. Your global to your project types any top level JavaScript files and everything under lib, for example. But you can also exclude stuff too. So you could exclude your test, exclude your examples, whatever. And there's an exclude directive that we'll see later. Type roots is really important. Type roots is going to be node modules @types and then typings. And I believe they need to go in this order. And your typings are going to be basically just your overrides. We talked about that. And then essentially these are the things that are different. If you just run tsc --init, it's going to generate your tsconfig.json file. And we're looking at the things that are different mostly here. So target, I just use esnext. Module will be common.js by default if it detects that you're doing a node package. You want allow.js true, check.js true. This means allow.js means that it'll read JS files at all. Check.js means that it will not just read them to try to infer information, but it'll lint it for incorrect type information. No omit means we're not intending to transpile anything here. We're just going to be reading, not writing. And then ES module interop, that's actually already on by default. So I think we covered all the options there that are in the TS config. And then no implicit any is another option where you probably want this. If it's an existing project, you'll want to turn this to false, because basically if you have an existing project, there's going to be so many type warnings, it's not going to be useful for you. But if you're starting a new project, then you would want no implicit any to be true, which is basically anytime you don't have type information, it's going to warn you about it. And then you go add type information to it. So what that would look like from scratch, if we had an existing project that's already there, you would just install npm install -g TypeScript, and you run tsc-init, like I said earlier, and then you'd want to install you'd want to get your type/node, and then if you're using Express, you'd want type/express, and then you'll find out based on the warnings what's missing. You'll just want to Google and see, is there a types/whatever? And typically it's the name of the package. So if you got some package, you could just try installing npm install --save dev @type/package name. But I wouldn't do that just right off the bat. Wait until you see if you get some type errors, because it's quite likely that many of the popular packages include in the package the type definitions for TypeScript, even when they're JavaScript projects. So if we just look at what we just talked about before, so this is all we have to do, and we've got an existing Express project. This is it. All we have to do is do that, and then we need to update our tsconfig.json that's generated automatically. And we would just change a couple of these things. So I put the diff here. Again, allow JavaScript, check JavaScript, no omit, no implicit any. Type roots, again, this is one you want to make sure you don't have typos in this, and you want to make sure you don't have any typos in your include, because if it's not working at all, that's probably what it is. And once you get this set up to test it, to make sure that it's just baseline working, you can just type tsc in the directory, and I'll show you that right here. So if I just type tsc and hit enter, it's going to take a second. And then on a bigger project, it could take many seconds, but then it'll spit out. It doesn't do per file, it does per project. So it'll spit out every single thing that it finds, and some of them you can ignore. We'll talk about that a bit in a second. So we went through config that you need for your computer, that you need per project, and kind of how you'd add this into an existing project. Now let's just go through this repository that's set up as a demo, and let's go fix those errors, because that'll give you kind of a feeling for how you get things set up and show you some of what the JSDoc looks like and all that. So let's get into the nitty gritty now. So I'm going to go ahead and open up server.js. And then before I even do that, let me show you what my vimrc looks like. So I don't want to change the TypeServer linter to be for all of my JavaScript projects. So what I did for Vim, I just did set xrc. This is in my main vimrc in my home directory, and set secure. And what this means is basically it can load Vim files per directory, but that's what xrc, external RC, means. And set secure means, but it's only going to load variables. It's not going to load functions. So that way it's not like you go into directory, open Vim, and then you could get attacked by having downloaded a project or something like that. Right. So that's what I got there. That's in my home folder. So here's the local, the local one. I put plenty of comments in here. So hopefully, you can decide for yourself how you want it. But again, just like I said, I've got JavaScript, tsserver, and JSHint. Those are the ones that I like to use. I've got JSHint installed as well. And then lint on enter. So I don't want to wait until I save. As soon as I open up the file, I want to kick off the tsserver and have it linting. And then I got some stuff for IntelliSense here. completion enabled, auto import. And then if it's a large project, you probably only want to have it lint on save, and you don't want to have it lint on enter. So you would swap these out. Anyway, so that's the Vim stuff. So I'm in here, and so this doesn't exist. Easy enough. We'll just comment that out. That's not a problem. But let's go look at some of the type stuff. Okay, so here again, this one, it just knows like, hey, this could be potentially null. So I'll say, okay, well, we'll give it, if it's null, we'll just give it an empty array, and that'll make it quick and plain, whatever. That's not really that interesting. This is where it starts to get interesting. So you'll notice here, we haven't done anything to tell it that user 1 is a user or that user 2 is a user. But what we have done down here is we've said, well, the result array is an array of users. So here's JSDoc, right? So we've got, it's 2 stars rather than just 1 star, normal comments like that for a block comment. We've got 2 stars and then immediately followed by @type. And then we tell it what type we want it to be. So it's saying it's going to interpret this as an array of users. Now I need to go show you where I defined where the users are. So, but it's being able to look at these and say, hey, these don't match what a user is supposed to be. So let's go. I think the reason is that user 2 is actually missing something. If we look at the error down there, it says user 2 is missing family name. So let's just say family name is fruit. And the other thing is that it's complaining about is it's saying, well, we need a favorite book. So over here, user 1 has a favorite book, and user 2 does not have a favorite book, and it's saying favorite book is required for user. So let's go change that real quick. So like I said, I've got my types.js. This is where I just put JSDoc, where I define types that I want to use throughout the project. I've got some notes in here so you can see what the syntax is for JSDoc. So we say we've got a user, it's got a given name, it's required. Family name is required. Favorite movie is optional. If you put it in square brackets, if you put the name, so you can see here it's type definition. So we're defining the type of a user as an object. It must have a property that's a string, given name, has a property that's a string, family name. And this, because we put the square brackets around favorite movie, it's optional. So we'll go ahead and do that around book as well. Now book is optional. And then we can have an array of, we can have friends, which is optional, which is an array of users. Let's go ahead and we'll make that not optional because it's nice if it's an array. It should just be an empty array, not possibly null. And then we say we could also have some stuff. And I don't really want to fill that one out, so I'm not going to bother with it. But yeah, this is what our type definition for user looks like. So anywhere where we type something as user, or it can infer that something's supposed to accept a user or something's supposed to return a user, that's where this comes from right here. And then there's a couple of different syntaxes that, as you get to the point where you need them, you'll kind of understand. So I just put that in here. But basically, we saw this right here. So we could say, and this is something that's specific to TypeScript that's important to use in JSDoc is record. If you want something to be a map, like a hash map or an object type, that's what you want to use. So use record, and then you give it the type of the key is string and the type of the value is any. That's just your generic JavaScript hash map. But you can OR type. So this can be a record type, meaning a generic hash map, or it can be null. And then you can also AND types, which means this must have all the properties of foo and must have all the properties of bar. That you'll know when you need it. It'll come in handy. So I'm going to get out of here. What I did, just to recap, what I did was I changed favorite book to being optional and friends to being not optional. So now if we go back into server.js, I'm going to go back up to the top, and we're going to see, oh, this user's not really a user anymore, and it's because it's missing friends. So we'll go ahead and give the user friends, and we'll go down here, and it could be kind of the same problem with user 1 and user 2. Okay, now that went away. So again, notice the error comes down here because it's like, well, I don't care what you did with user 2 here because you didn't tell me what type it was. I don't care. But then here, you did tell me. I've got the comment there for the type. So let's go ahead and just add this type here as well. So let's say we're going to cast this let user 2. We're going to cast user 2 as a user right up here. So now we're going to get the type information there. But I like to put it in as few places as possible. But let's go ahead and go back and, whoops, sorry, I didn't mean to jump like that. But we're going to go back and then give user 2 some friends. Now that error's gone away. So what else? What other errors do we have? Okay, this one, same thing. We have friends. Let's go ahead. Now I'll show you right now how I extended the request object of Express to have a user property. And we'll see here that the request object does not have an admin property. So this is not something that we can do with JSDoc. Extending an existing type requires doing type definitions. So we'll see that right now. So I've got my typings folder. You'll see this in documentation as @types or types or typings. Typings is what's in the official documentation, but there's a couple different conventions out there that you'll see as you're going through blogs and Stack Overflow and all that. Anyway, so you have to name your, just like, so this mirrors the structure of Node @types, or Node modules @types, right? So here we can see these are all the types that were installed. So we've got types for body parser, types for Express, and all I installed was Node and Express, but it grabbed these other types because they were dependencies. So again, we can make our own typings folder, just like this Node modules @types is a typing folder, but we have to name the folder the same as the module that we want to add to or extend or override. So I'm going to go in here under typings and Express index.d.ts. It needs to be called index.d.ts, or in other cases in your own project, if you end up having to add type definitions, it'll be the same name as the file that you created. So if you had like a user.js, if you found that you actually needed to use not JSDoc, but you had to use TypeScript definitions, you would create a user.d.ts. But we're not going to get into that here. So I'm in here. You kind of have to Stack Overflow this a little bit to figure out what the right thing to do. But basically, you're going to declare a namespace that's going to be the name of the module, and you're going to export either an interface or class or something like that, and you're going to tell it what to expect. So what I've told it is that the request object for Express may or may not have a query, it may or may not have a user, and it may or may not have an auth-in object. And now I'm going to tell it that it has to have, well, that's not really true. It doesn't have to have, so I should make it optional. But I think it's a little bit weird because sometimes you use the uppercase like this, and sometimes you have to use the lowercase, but you'll just figure that out as needed because you'll get an error sometimes. Sometimes it allows both. It's a little confusing. But I'm going to say admin. So basically rec.admin is now a Boolean. So I've added that. And then in my response, sometimes you've got like res.send, res.json. If you want to add your own like res.xml, heaven forbid, or res.result or res.success or something like that, this is where you'd add that as well. So this is how you extend the interface. So now if we go back in, remember the thing that I changed was I added admin Boolean. So let's go back to server.js, and we can see now rec.admin equals true. This is allowed, but if I did rec.admin equals banana, now I'm getting type linting on it. Okay, so that's how I extend it. And then let me see if there's anything else in here. Let's see, what was this one? Ah, yeah, okay. So rec.user, we said that it is optional. So with the type linting, it can do if statements pretty well. I've noticed it's not quite so good about switch statements, but if else it's pretty good about understanding that exhaustively you've checked all the options. So now if we do an if rec.user, then it's not going to complain. But if we don't check that user's there, then it's going to complain like, hey, the user may not have been added. So that's kind of cool. Whoops, I did not mean to jump like that again. Sorry. Rec.user, there we are. And then let's see, down here, yeah, this one, that function just doesn't exist. So we'll go add that real quick. I think that's all the errors in this file. So yeah, we found there's an error there. Let's go to lib.routes.js. So I'm going to lib routes.js, and we're just going to add a function goodbye. And in this particular case, we need to do a @type import express.handler to let it know that it's a handler. And I think, let's see if we get the auto completion on this one. Let's see. Do we get auto completion? Sometimes it feels like it's hit or miss. And right now it's a miss for me. I don't know why. But that's okay. That's a different problem to figure out another time. Anyway, so now I've got my goodbye function. Let me go ahead and add that in here. And I'll be interested to see. I'm actually going to remove this first. Now it's complaining. It's complaining because it's saying, hey, I don't know what to type this in this particular file. But I think, we're going to try this out. I think if we go back to the server file, here, I don't think we're going to get an error for it. Let me go ahead and do goodbye X. Yeah, so now it's complaining. But it knows that app is from Express. And so it just kind of casts the function. It checks the function, sees the function has the right signature, and it just kind of casts it. So if I was going to go back here, and let's say I was going to add a function signature that Express can't handle. So let's say I did this. I'm just putting junk here. So this is a function signature that is never allowed by Express. So if we go back, let's see, does it give me the error? Oh, it does not. Oh, interesting. Okay, well, there goes that theory. Anyway, so I think that's pretty much everything that I wanted to cover. If you got any questions, let me know. I'm actually going to check the comments real quick because I am doing this live, but I did not pull up comments this time. Oh yeah, we do have some comments. Yeah, you're very welcome. I'm glad that you're learning so much. That's awesome. We don't have any questions. If you have any questions, I'll hang around for just a second to answer them. But I think this is pretty much what you need to know. You've got your normal project, and you just start adding JSDoc to it. And in a couple of places, you add TypeScript specific files, but you don't have to go too heavy into the TypeScript. You have to do a little Stack Overflow, whatever. One thing I will mention is that here I put in something where I would need to use the TypeScript definitions on purpose. it's just kind of bogus. All I'm doing is pretending that I have my own custom router, that I'm going to create a router function that returns a router, and maybe I modify the express router in some way in the JavaScript, like I monkey patch the express router. Well, if I'm doing that, then tsserver wouldn't know that the thing I'm returning that I've monkey patched, it wouldn't know that it actually is an express router. So I have to do two things to solve this. One is, this is how you do a function in JSDoc. You do @param, and then you do @returns. One param for, if there's like 2, 3, 4 params, then you just copy param 2, 3, 4 times, and you do that. So you would type it in the JavaScript, but just kind of a quirk of this type of behavior, you have to also then type it with TypeScript as well. So because this already is a TypeScript type that we're dealing with, it already is, Express already has TypeScript definitions. So we end up having to do both, right? The JSDoc and the TypeScript definition. So this is what the JSDoc would look like. And then if we want to do the type definition, it would be like this. So I'm just saying, this is TypeScript. So import express from express, and then export function router. I'm defining my function, the function that's in my file, myrouter.js. So I'm going to export that function as a TypeScript definition that takes optional options as express.router options. So I keep that typing information and returns an express.router. So that's what lets it know that my monkey patched version of the express router should be treated as the express router. Okay, so I don't see any more questions coming in, so I'm just going to let that one be. I hope that you learned a lot and that this is something that's useful. Again, this is JSDoc TypeScript Starter on Beyond Code Bootcamp. Give it a thumbs up. If you like what you like, you get more of what you like. And if this was useful, I'd appreciate that if you had one of those aha moments or anything like that. I hope that you have a great night. Leave comments down below with anything that you thought was like, oh, wow, this was real aha for me, or questions that you have. Love to hear it. Love to read it. I'll respond to it. And I will catch you later. So with all that said, adios.